It's a mountaineer's dream to climb up through the clouds and to stand atop this, Switzerland's most challenging peak. But the Eiger is treacherous. Its shifting winds and variable weather can mean the difference between life and death for even the most experienced climbers. This is the story of two young climbers from Germany, Holger Wendel and Thomas Berger. In 1983, they decided to take on the greatest and most perilous challenge of all, the north face of the Eiger.
The
north face of the Eiger changed my life completely. I went through hell there, but at the same time it opened up a new life for me. But it did destroy my dream of climbing. My friend Holger and I were up for adventure, and we were taking on tougher and tougher climbs. We felt absolutely free, and when we just made it after a climb, we really felt that we were untouchable. We dreamt of becoming professional climbers, and the north face of the Eiger was to be a kind of initiation for us.
The Eiger, a gigantic wall of rock and snow, flanked by the icy silhouette of the Virgin and the Monk. Since alpine climbing became a mass phenomenon, this panorama has drawn tourists in their thousands to the little town of Kleiner Scheidegg. As early as 1912, a funicular railway was constructed, which allows visitors to reach the Jungfraujoch through a long tunnel bored through the mountain. Late July 1983, Holger Wendel and Thomas Berger reach Kleiner Scheidegg at the foot of the Eiger on the funicular.
All the activity up here surprised us. Everybody was rushing around, and up there, the peak of the Eiger just seemed to radiate peace and quiet.
The peak reached 3,970 meters. The north face alone is a sheer 1,800 meters. That same summer, mountain film specialist Gerhard Bauer is making a film about the dramatic history of the legendary North Face. The film crew doesn't realize that during the shoot, it too will become involved in a new drama. A drama that will take place behind a thick curtain of cloud, quite unlike the events of 1936, which Gerhard Bauer is filming in their original locations. Over 50 people have lost their lives as they've taken on this, the greatest challenge of the Alps.
We were young then, just 18 and 19. The deadly legend of the North Face just filled us with enthusiasm. We really wanted to test ourselves against this challenge.
In the meadows next to the rock face, Holger and Thomas pitched their small two-man tent.
I was excited when Holger suggested we start the climb right away. This had been a dream for over a year, and now we had it in front of us. It was an incredible feeling. We could be up there, on top, tomorrow, we thought. One day, maybe two. It seemed that the North Face belonged to us. That's how excited we were. But in reality, we belonged to it. We wanted to climb over the incline as quickly as possible. We knew that when the sun hits the iced-up side of the peak, the snow melts and everything just slides down the mountain. The rockfall happened without warning. The Eiger is unpredictable. Holger stopped suddenly in front of me. There was an old shoe in front of him. Who could it have belonged to?
In 1935, Karl Mehringer and Max Zadelmeier from Munich made the first attempt on the North Face. But their brave attempt ended tragically, and since then, the place where the pair were last seen alive has been known as Death Bivouac.
At that moment, the legend of the North Face, with its dramatic history, weighed on us even more heavily than our rucksack.
Thomas and Holger wanted to take the classic route, by which the North Face was first conquered in 1938. The incline ends beneath a steep overhang by an exit from the funicular tunnel.
Two Swiss climbers were abseiling down the rock face.
Was ist passiert? Zweite Schneefall hat einen Stein erwischt. Fällt das von Sonne irgendwas?
One of them had injured his hand in a rockfall. There just aren't any safe places on the Eiger. It's extraordinary that there's a doorway here which takes you through into the funicular tunnel. In just a few steps, you're in safety.
Schritten in Sicherheit bist.
The North Face had already shown us its true character 3 times as we climbed the incline. First there was the rockfall, and then the old shoe, and now there was the injured Swiss man. All this in the easy reaches at the beginning. We were nervous and thought about turning back, but neither of us dared mention our fears to the other. We wanted to climb the rock face without using ropes, and the tricky climbs below the famous Hinterstoisser traverse demanded our complete concentration.
In 1936, on the second attempt, a group of 4 climbers, 2 Germans and 2 Austrians, conquered the most difficult stretch of the North Face, a 30-meter traverse. But they made a fateful error as they pulled in the crossing rope. Today, climbers can make use of a fixed line suspended from pitons to make the difficult traverse.
Scheiße, das Seil ist runter. Ah, ist liegen geblieben. Kommen wir da hin? Ich glaube schon. Ich hab's. Haben wir noch mal Glück gehabt da.
Ein Haar wären wir...
We nearly lost the emergency rope. We knew that we couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice.
Uns kein zweites Mal passieren.
This was the crossing which spelt an end to the 1936 expedition. The climbers were caught in a storm and had to turn back. But now the traverse was iced up, and they could not climb across. Three climbers were swept off the rocks, and only the last, Tony Kurtz, survived and waited desperately for help.
Gigantisch. Maar dan een rechtje, dat moet nog gegangen zijn, ja? Menschen, ne? Ja, ja. Der Zug da raus.
Das Schwalbennest
The Swallow's Nest is one of the few safe spots for a bivouac on the Eiger.
Wetter schaut gigantisch aus, hä? Super, ja. Ja.
We were enjoying the wonderful atmosphere, and it was the exact same spot that Tony Kurtz had struggled for his life 50 years earlier.
He was suspended above a giant overhang, out of reach of the rescue party.
Dreh das Seil auf!
All he could do was unweave the strands of the remains of the rope and pull up a rope with the string he made.
Ich hab's! Gut! Halt! Weiter einziehen!
With his last strength, he managed it. Now, surely nothing more could go wrong. He roped down to the rescuers, suspended some 4 meters from the face of the rock. Then, suddenly, he stuck fast. A knot in the rope had jammed in his carabiner. He spoke his last words, "I can't go on." After 4 days on the north face of the Eiger, Tony Kurtz died, only 3 meters from his rescuers.
Dat is... Oh man, es ist 7:30. Ah, ich bin voll geschlafen. Aber jetzt wird's los.
Nach dem Schreck verschlafen zu haben...
After the shock of having overslept, it was especially difficult for us to find the concentration we needed for climbing without a rope. We climbed rapidly. One of the unique things about the North Face is the higher you go, the harder and steeper is the climb. At 9 we reached the second ice field, we were already halfway, but it still seemed as if the climb would never end. Below Death Bivouac, we found old lengths of rope, which must have been left over from dramatic return journeys.
Das ist ein altes Fixseil. Da kommt voll eine schwarze Wand.
It was clear what that meant. We'd read often enough what it means to get caught in a weather change at this spot. It had been enough to kill several climbers before us. We were now caught in a trap. The rock was far too difficult to climb in the storm, and below us the snowslides, avalanches and rockfalls were getting more and more violent. They were sweeping everything away with them. We didn't need to say anything. We just looked at each other and knew that even if we hadn't a chance, we had to try to get down again. Now that Holger only had one crampon left, we could only get down by abseiling over the second ice field. Within minutes, the rock was covered with a thick layer of ice. I couldn't find a suitable crack to stick in a piton for abseiling from, but we had to get away as quickly as possible.
Das muss so reichen. Anders geht's nicht.
Our only hope was to wedge the piton into the crack. It was clear that it could slip out at any moment. And then we drew lots. Whoever drew the shorter piton would have to go first. It was me. It was insane. It was more than fear. Gloves off, and I passed the rope slowly through my hands. No sudden movements. The cliff face stretched 1,000 meters into nothingness below me. And then it was Holger's turn to risk his life on the piton, which was just lying in the split in the rock. A tiny jerk, and he'd tumble straight past me to his death. With a gigantic clap of thunder and insane speed came fall after fall of snow and sleet, We were almost torn off the rock. It was all we could do now to hold on. We clung to our ice axes, to the rock, to anything we could get hold of. And the longer it went on, the more we were shaken with cramp. Our muscles were completely exhausted from holding on. There was a time when all we could do was scream in fear. We were really near to falling off. The only thing which kept us alive was the will to survive the next second. Just 1 second more, and another, and another. And what was most important was that we weren't alone. Our friend was always there. We couldn't actually do anything for each other. We had to struggle for our own survival. But it was important that someone was there, that we weren't alone. Towards evening, the storm slackened off, and we found a small ledge to make our bivouac.
Oh, het is fertig, glaube ich. Fertig. Oh, ich glaube, bis Mittag sind wir vielleicht am Stollerloch, wenn wir Glück haben.
Holger had hurt his shoulder, and I'd hurt my knee. My gloves and one of my crampons had gone. In that moment we reached the depths of despair, and neither of us believed we'd get off the mountain alive. The next morning brought thick snow and icy cold. We would have just sat tight and waited for rescue if we could. But we knew that no one could help us in that weather. My fingers were stiff from cold, and every movement hurt. It was only with the greatest effort that I could hold on to the rope. Just don't let go, I thought to myself, or that's the end of getting down safely. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, and needed all my strength of will not to let the rope slide out of my fingers. I was crippled with the cold. Holger pulled his gloves onto me as if I was a helpless child, and slowly, feeling came back into my fingers, although it came with burning pain. I couldn't believe it. After abseiling down hundreds of meters, both my gloves were just lying there, where the avalanche had dumped them the night before. At last, a glimmer of hope after all that misery.
Und dann stockte uns plötzlich der Atem.
And then, suddenly, it got a lot worse. Our rope had iced up, and we couldn't pull it down.
Uns blieb nichts anderes übrig.
We had no choice. We cut off the last 10 meters, which was all we could reach, and then climbed down with no safety rope across the snowy rocks. It was clear that every handhold and every step could be our last. We were at the end of our strength, completely drained. But the fact that maybe 80 or 100 meters below us we'd find the door to the funicular tunnel gave us strength to go on. We couldn't think of falling again. Now we were in safety. Just a few more steps to the tunnel entrance and we'd be safe. The tunnel entrance had to be somewhere. But we looked around and this snowslide had changed the whole landscape completely. There were piles of snow everywhere. One strip looked exactly like another. For us, the tunnel was simply the only hope of finding a way back down off the mountain. We were looking separately, and suddenly, Holger had disappeared.
Holger! Holger! Holger!
We couldn't believe it. The tunnel entrance, the gateway back to life. We couldn't find it. We just stood there with tears in our eyes. Another night in this awful place. We just didn't know how to cope. But sometime our will to live came back, and we started to think of what would happen next. But then, as we pulled off the hoods of our bivvy bags next morning, there was a meter of new snow over everything. I tried to stand up, but I couldn't move my legs. I just didn't have the strength to get up. Then Holger tried and almost slipped off the mountain. Now we realized we had no chance of getting down.
Sie sind drecknass, alle. Drecknass. Das geht nicht.
Die sind irgendwie drecknass.
Scheiße. Wenn sie trocken.
Even a cup of tea. That would have been a godsend.
4 Tage.
We'd already been on the mountain for 4 days.
Hallo! Hilfe!
Es war aussichtslos.
It was hopeless. We knew our cries for help would be lost in the storm, and our light signals would be lost in the fog.
August the 5th. The mountain film team Gerhard Bauer and Karl Bernegg wait for better weather in Kleine Scheidegg. There they come across the first in a chain of coincidences. In the meadows below the Eiger, they find a deserted tent, blown about by the wind. But the owners are nowhere to be seen.
Oh, da ist ja Ausrüstung drin. Ein Bergsteiger, Carlo.
They don't find much. The container for a sleeping bag with the initials HW and a scribbled-on pencil case with the letters TB on it. It was an indication of the identity of the owners of the tent, but where they were, Bauer and Bernegg couldn't discover.
Nach 6 Tagen in der Wand.
After 6 days on the mountain, our legs were frozen and our bodies so chilled that we could hardly feel any more pain. We just stared in front of us without caring anymore.
Und dann doch wieder Hoffnung.
And then came hope again.
Mein Gott.
We'd had such fantastic times in the mountains. We wanted to experience everything for ourselves, test our strength and explore the world.
Und die Welt auf eigene Faust erkunden.
Da ist jetzt gar kein Gefühl mehr.
Es ging darum, nicht ans Überleben zu denken.
We weren't even thinking of surviving now, just hoping that it would get light again. And we just kept on talking our courage up again.
Wir haben uns immer wieder aufs neue Mut zugesprochen. Irgendjemand wird uns doch sehen in dieser
Someone would surely see us on the rock. Otherwise we were already lost.
Allerdings wusste
But no one knew that we were up on the mountain. We hadn't wanted to scare our parents, and we hadn't wanted to show off to our friends that we were going to take on the North Face.
jetzt auch nicht angeben, ich steige
That's something you boast about later, when you're back.
wenn du heimkommst. Aber der
We
Fehler
were going
ist
to
uns jetzt
pay
mit der
for our
Rechnung.
recklessness.
August the 6th. The tent is still uninhabited. Before his departure, Gerhard Bauer takes the time to contact the Chief of Rescue Services in nearby Grindelwald.
Es geht ein verlassenes Zelt unter der Eiger Nordwand.
But no one has been reported missing yet.
First, you have to know where the people are. They could already be home and just have left the tent behind. And you don't just start a search. There's going to be problems with paying. Who pays for it all? They could have said, we can just leave the tent where it is and go home. You have to make inquiries as to where they are first.
On the trip back to Germany, Bauer and Bernegg become increasingly concerned about the deserted tent. Maybe its owners started their climb just before the weather closed in. Then they would have been trapped up there for 7 days already. And coincidence plays a part again. Bernegg calls up a friend who happens to know who HW and TB are. The tent can only belong to the young climbers, Holger Wendel and Thomas Berger. Holger's mother is confronted with uncertainty. Are the boys still alive? Or have they perished on the mountainside?
Also ich habe wenig Hoffnung gehabt, muss ich echt sagen, weil
I really didn't have much hope left.
wie schnell das
When
geht,
you know what can happen on the Eiger, you just can't hope
dass
for
man so
much.
Wand, mei, das hat ja
There are avalanches and ice falls,
das hat
there's
ja
cold and
Eislawinen,
snow,
Lawine.
so there's very little hope.
Da ist die Hoffnung eigentlich sehr
All
gering.
you can hope for is that they'll be found
Trotzdem,
soon,
hoffentlich haben sie es bei,
so you know exactly what happened.
dass man weiß, was los ist.
Hey, die suchen uns. Die suchen uns. Hey! Hey! Das ist ein Flugzeug.
Vor lauter Hunger.
We were so hungry, we kept licking out our empty lemon powder sachets. We had no idea how long we'd been up here. We'd lost all sense of time. Day and night ran into one another.
Holger? Holger? Holger?
With Holger lying dead beside me, it became clear to me that I was going to die as well. I couldn't see any point in coming off the mountain alive anymore. We had experienced everything together and suffered everything together. Now he died in front of my eyes, and a part of me died with him. It was mad, but I somehow had the feeling of floating, seeing myself from outside with Holger beside me.
August the 8th. It's only now, 9 days after Holger and Thomas first set out on their climb, that a helicopter from the Swiss Rescue Service can start to search the snowed-up mountainside. Mountain rescuer Uli Roth and pilot Gunther Aumann know the Eiger from many rescue flights. There is no sign of life, no movement on the upper part of the mountain. They fly further up to the peak to try to find the path down.
It's always difficult to find people. The mountain's very big, and they'd already been in the same place for several days. Their equipment blended in with the rock face. They were very difficult to see. We really didn't think we'd find them alive. We had the body bags ready. We thought we were there just to pick up the bodies. We'd been searching for over an hour, and we wanted to break off the search. And then, in the last minute, Uli Roth saw something. We flew down, and we found them both. Then we landed at Kleine Scheidegg and prepared the helicopter for a winch rescue.
At first I was really disappointed that it went away again, and then I thought I must have imagined the whole thing anyway. But then I heard it again. I wasn't certain whether I'd dreamed the whole thing or whether it was real.
Wie geht's dem Kollegen? Hä? Kollege, wie geht's dem? Weisst nicht?
The mountain rescuer, Uli Roth, was flown to them both, and he radioed up straight away that a doctor was needed. Uli Roth is well trained, but he didn't want to take responsibility here. For the first time, we flew a doctor, Dr. Cermak, to the mountain. He packed up an infusion and prepared for the trip, and the climber was flown in a horizontal net as far as Kleine Scheidegg. Meanwhile, a second helicopter was ordered up. He was loaded into it and flown direct to the hospital in Interlaken.
The rescue doctor couldn't believe what he found. Holger still held on to a few scraps of life.
Medically speaking, he was nearer to death than to life when he arrived here. What was interesting in his case, almost a miracle, was that his heart was still beating, if irregularly, with a confirmed body temperature of 23 degrees. We gave him oxygen and warm infusions. We covered him up and warmed him up very slowly and carefully. This was a process carried out over several hours. And when he reached 27 degrees, his heartbeat became regular, and we knew he had survived the worst.
Suddenly, everything flew by. We had struggled and suffered for 9 days, and in the end given up all hope. I felt I was floating and being carried away from this ordeal. The walls of the mountain swayed around me. It was all blurry, unreal. I only came to myself in the hard light of the hospital. In that moment, it was clear to me that I had really been rescued. It was an indescribable feeling of happiness. And then images came into my mind. I saw Holger lying next to me, lifeless, in the snow. I was going to have to live, while Holger was dead. When the nurse told me that Holger was still alive, I thought that she was simply humoring me. But when they wheeled me into the room with Holger and I saw that he really was still alive, I just couldn't believe it. I was totally confused. I couldn't think of anything. I wasn't capable of showing how happy I was. I was speechless. It was a miracle.
It really was the last second. They wouldn't have been able to hold out another day, that's 100% sure. I've always said, we brought them both back from the devil's death cart. It was one of the most impressive rescues we've made, and it was really very satisfying that we were able to bring them back alive.
Holger's enthusiasm for climbing was just as strong as ever when he left hospital. And then something terrible happened. Just a year later, he was killed in a tragic accident. It was very difficult for me to accept this for a long time. But sometime I learned to see our failure on the Eiger as a chance to find a new life, with room for friends, for music, for books, and for climbing as well. I remembered the wonderful times I'd spent with Holger in the mountains, and today the sheer variety of the world fascinates me. The mountains aren't my whole life anymore, but they're a part of it, a very important part.